Welcome to Bookstorm. We are super excited to have the talented author Tosca Lee with us today. She is a New York Times best-selling author of 11 novels. Publishers Weekly boasts Tosca has superior storytelling skills. The author Stephen James says Tosca is one of the most gifted novelists writing today. But I have to tell you a little bit more about Tosca's fascinating background. She began as a classical trained ballerina and pursued an early career in dance until she sustained injuries. She's held 2 pageant titles, Mrs. Nebraska and first runner-up to Mrs. United States. And let us not forget her heartfelt philanthropic work and advocacy of health, women's, children's, ethnic, and cultural groups. Thank you for that, Tosca. She was awarded an admiralship of the Great Navy of the state of Nebraska. And in addition to the huge honor of being placed on the New York Times bestseller list, she's earned Goodreads Choice Awards, Top Shelf Magazine Editor's Choice, Book of the Year Realm Makers, and I could go on and on. And in her spare time, she is a notorious night owl. She loves watching TV, eating bacon, which means you'll be our friend forever.
Not mine.
Not yours. She's vegetarian. You'll
That's
be
right.
my friend forever. Playing video games with her kids and sending cheesy texts to her husband. Tosca, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We love all of your books. We're huge fans. We adore your writing. But we're here today to talk to you about your latest 2 books in a series.
Yes, in fact, your books are fantastic. In fact, one of my favorite books of all time is Hava. That book was just amazing and really turned around the way that I think about a lot of things. It was just so vivid. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
So we don't want to give away too many spoilers to our listeners, but I thought I would just give them very briefly a background on both of the books. You can see one of them here, The Line Between. The Line Between starts right out of the gate with 22-year-old Winter Roth, and she is being expelled from a doomsday cult. And your books take us on a wild ride from page 1 until the very end. But this one was just fascinating with how it started. But this doomsday cult really instilled ideas of the end of the world coming. And so when Winter Roth is expelled, lo and behold, she comes out into an environment where there is a mysterious outbreak of a virus. And this is something referred to as a rapid early onset dementia is what this virus causes in people. And it reinforces a lot of the fears and things she was told in the cult. So the rest of the book, of course, is just this incredible odyssey that Winter goes through of her escaping the cult and that mentality, as well as this idea of her efforts to save the nation. Is so exciting. Book 2, just love it. A Single Light picks up a short while later, and at this juncture, Winter and an ex-soldier, his name is Chase Miller, emerge from a bunker, and they emerge into a world that is absolutely in chaos. It has been ravaged by disease. In fact, many of the things and the parallels that we see happening now in what we're dealing with a pandemic, we see some of those things in this book, even though it was written long before, of course, the pandemic was ever a big part of our national consciousness. But one of the aspects that comes through loud and clear is Winter's devotion to one of her dear friends and her efforts to try to save her. So we'll kind of leave some of the facts there, but I thought that would give our listeners a little bit of a backdrop without spoiling.
So as we said, we love this book. I'm going to start my first question with the first book. I loved this line in the book. The heroine Winter is referring to the cult that she's been imprisoned in. And she says she thought she blamed one person, the cult leader, but we were the ones who helped create him. And I just thought that was such an eye-opener that silence is a choice. A leader requires followers. A movement requires support. Evil prevails because either we follow it or we're silent. In your book, hurting people willfully enter and follow a cult in a leader. even after they're repeatedly hurt or abused. It made me think of the Stockholm Syndrome. We all know it. It's a situation where the hostage develops a psychological bond towards her captor. The hostage longs for safety, for the abuse to stop, but they cling to the very thing that was abusing him. And we wondered, as the author of this phenomenal story, what personality traits did you believe or instill into Winter that you think that she possessed in order to break out of this cult? And second part of this question, what personality traits or history did her mother have that caused her to want to join such a group?
Can you repeat that second question also?
Yeah,
Sorry.
the second one was but her mother had different personality traits than Winter, because Winter had an inherent ability to see the truth behind the cult leader, but her mother longed to stay in the cult. Two very different persons. You wrote these two characters, and what personality traits did you instill in them, or maybe did you discover in them that caused them to take these two very different directions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. So Winter's mom in the story has escaped an abusive situation, and so that's part of the appeal of joining this cult because, historically speaking, when you join a cult, a part of the way that you're lured in, nobody sets out to join a cult. Nobody says, I think I'll join a cult today. But you're lured in by this sense of community and this thing called love bombing. So they love bomb you. And so you feel loved and accepted. And that's the thing that for Winter's mom, that she is longing for. She's longing for safety. This religious community is a closed community. It is a compound. So it is very much segregated from the rest of the outside world. And so I think for her, that was the most important thing. Whether she questioned any of the practices going on in the community or not, we don't really know because she's separated from Winter. And this kind of thing can often happen as well in situations like that. Winter's a little different. I always try to write characters that can inspire us with their heroism, with their intrepid characteristics, but who also may feel familiar to us that we can easily identify with. And in this case, I think Winter's the one who's asking the questions you're not supposed to ask. Some of us have been in situations where, your questions are squelched or, we don't ask that. She's wondering all the things that we often wonder that we may or may not say. She's quietly, rebelling according to the cult standards, but she's longing to know more about the world that she was removed from at such an early age. And so for her, she's curious, she's questioning. She's not trying to be a bad follower. She's just following her natural instincts to want to know more about the world they're in, and also how the rules that she's living under, how those apply to even the same set of standards that she's supposed to be living under. So the things that don't quite jive, the double standards that she's noticing, that of course she's not supposed to say anything about. So in that way, I wanted her to be kind of an every woman, and every person that we might be able to identify with, as we've all faced situations like that.
Mm-hmm. She's a beautiful character. And if we don't identify with her, we want to be more like her. Someone inquisitive that dares to question. She was a beautiful character.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that curiosity and that bravery, simultaneously. Tosca, your books have a lot of layers. And, we could probably spend a lot of shows talking about issues like altruism and sustainability, the environmental themes. Of course, as an environmental lawyer, those leapt out at me because we're talking about permafrost and it's starting to thaw and releasing these new viruses into the world. Even military service, fear, so many things we could delve into. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I thought was very interesting is that when Winter emerges into this world, not a lot of good things are going on. There's a lot of chaos, right, and lawlessness. And I was wondering if you were really exploring this idea of fear and how people respond when they are having a lot of fear. Do they exercise more control? We saw hoarding. We saw, manipulation. We saw some, difficult things emerging in society. And I was
Mhm.
wondering if you were kind of thinking about that as you were working.
Absolutely. And as you know, as authors, it's our job to put our main characters in these terrible situations and then, crank it up a notch or 10 and make it worse. So fear plays an important part. And also there comes a point, I think, for all of us when you reach that point where you are either going to be completely squashed by fear or you're going to go out guns blazing because suddenly you've reached the threshold of, I can't stay silent anymore. I can't stay still anymore. I have to do something, whatever it is. And that's a big part of why for Winter, the stakes are so personal. You mentioned that she's trying to help and take care of a loyal friend, also her niece. Yes, she's trying to save the world, but that's one thing. But when you drill it down to the people closest to you that you love, I think that's for her what motivates her, despite her fear, despite at times paralyzing fear. And she also deals with obsessive compulsive disorder throughout the book as well. So, but when something is that personal, I think that will motivate us every single time.
Yeah, that's for sure. A lot of people don't act until the circumstances are so uncomfortable that it outweighs the discomfort they have in acting. And so it's almost like a release or relief from the thing that has been holding them. And
Absolutely.
it's very
So true,
interesting.
good point. In the second book, when Winter is hidden inside the silo for such a very long time, and they're waiting for the warring in the world to become a little safer place for them to emerge, there's this line that I love this line as well. And she says, "In a flash, it occurs to me that all those months living in the silo, I spent waiting for our lives to start over. I should have been living right then with the people I love. But that moment is gone, and this is the only one that exists." This was profound wisdom for the reader. Was this a message that you were sending within these beautiful characters, that even in the worst of times, the most frantic and desperate of times, we can't forget to live, that every day is a gift? And what is, if I may ask, what does that mean to you, if you can share, even in your own personal life? Have you dealt with this, that I should have been living, I need to remember to live right here and now?
Yeah. That's something I cling to and try to remember all the time, because when we live in the past, we often live with regret. We often live with the what ifs. But that moment is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It may have shaped who we are today, but it's gone. And tomorrow hasn't happened yet. And so literally this moment right here, right now, with us speaking together, spending time together, this is the only moment that exists right now. And I think it's easy, during the pandemic, we tore our whole house up. I mean, this pandemic could not have come at a worse time. We literally had a toilet sitting in the middle of our basement and everything torn up. I had no office. I was trying to work out of the bedroom with cardboard over the windows to keep the glare off my screen. And I just kept thinking, when this is done, and when it's perfect, well, guess what? I think we can do that to ourselves, and we'll deprive ourselves of the joys of the moment, wherever they are, whatever they are, and wherever they may be found, because that moment may or may not ever come. And when it does, it's going to bring its own troubles and its own challenges. And it may not be as perfect as we think, or it may be more perfect. But, I think it's important to find those joys and live and in the mundane, and when things are torn up, or when things are not good or ideal, or we're going through tough times. I think that's important.
It's very words of wisdom that I think every reader is going to take with them, or I hope they will. Thank you for that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm, as you were talking, I was thinking about how many times in my life where I've been in a situation. I was in law school or undergraduate, and I was like, I can't wait for this to be done. And I look back on those years, and I didn't realize how good we had it, to be honest.
Oh, isn't that the truth? I do that too. I accelerated my college to graduate early. And within just a couple short years, I immediately already regretted it because it was such a special time with my friends that you never quite get back. And at the time, I just wanted to get on, but if I could do it over.
Oh, yeah.
But that time is done. So, I can only do the best I can right now.
There's a country song along these lines. You're going to miss this.
Yeah.
And it's a
Someday.
great song. And that's exactly what he's getting at with his daughter. Slow down and enjoy
Every
these times,
second. Every
even in the
second.
midst of a lot of chaos.
Every second.
Well, I guess I keep going back to lawlessness for some reason, but I was really interested in this theme of what was going on in society. And I was wondering if we look ahead 30, 40 years from your novel, what do you think happens? Do you think we go back to some of the, institutions that we have, like the military and universities and government? Or do you think society takes a little bit of a different turn? Because right now, everything seems a little up for grabs in your second novel.
Are you asking me in the, sorry, it's windy out today, so every now and then the connection's a little, are you asking me in the novel world or in the real world?
No, in your novel world.
In the
If we
novel
could project
world.
30, 40 years down the road, do you think things
Oh.
get back on track? Is there a new normal? Or do we cling to the things that have sustained us so far, like those institutions, like the military or universities?
This makes me want to go back into that world and write another book.
I was just
I
gonna
miss
say,
that character,
This could be a prompting for book 3 in the series.
I've had some requests for it. I'm not close to the idea. It was really hard to leave that world, and also to leave Winter, who's named after my stepdaughter, actually.
Oh.
So I think for this novel world that so much has changed, that this has been one of those moments of such massive paradigm shift. And, I think we've seen some of this happen in the real world in our lives. So much has changed trajectory in just the last 2 years because of the pandemic that we've been living through. The way we do our schooling, the way we do our interpersonal communications, the way that, we judge people based on their choices around their health and things like that, things that we probably never would have seen coming. So with this, kind of thing times 10 in the book world, I'd like to think that somewhere down the line, they might get back to having a military and having institutions that we rely on as a society and often take for granted, like universities and higher education and, the ability to go shopping and things like that. But I think that for them, it's going to be kind of a long haul. It might be a few decades indeed.
I always think about times in history where our confidence in certain institutions was shaken. For example, during the Great Depression. And, we relied on banks, and all of a sudden banks were failing. And there's many periods in history where, I think as a society, we are a little stunned to see something be rocked that way. So it's always interesting to see the following decade, for example, what did we then root ourselves in?
What we're experiencing right now with COVID, we've seen changes, unbelievable changes, and yet what is to come in our economy and with society. And I just want to always believe in the goodness of people and that there's really good that still lies ahead. All about overcoming. But so back to your third book, or what is on your radar? What can you give us a little clue about what you might be working on now?
I do have a book coming out in 2023 that I wrote with Marcus Brotherton, and Marcus is he's written so many books, but he's probably best known for his World War II nonfiction. And this is a story about 3 teenage best friends from Mobile, Alabama, who go off to the Philippines in 1941, right before Pearl Harbor, and are caught up in the war in the Pacific in the Philippines and become part of the infamous Bataan Death March. And so it was a tough book to write. It was a chapter of that particular time in history that I was not aware of before. And I think it's a really important story to tell. So, and again, it's a story of loyalty, and it's a story of hope. So
It sounds amazing. And you would say that that would be historical fiction, but based on some truths that you uncovered from that part of history?
yes, it is historical fiction. It is very much inspired by true accounts told by survivors, which were often very grisly accounts. But it is a harrowing moment in history. Um, but yeah, very much inspired by the true accounts of those who went through it.
We look forward to it. And hopefully, we'll have
Thank
you
you.
back on to talk about this next book.
Thank you
Yes,
very much.
absolutely. Do you have time for one more question, Tosca?
Absolutely, I
Okay.
do.
We've been talking about, disasters and catastrophic happenings, and I was wondering if you think that that brings out the best in people, because a lot of times we focus on the bad things that come out of these situations, like we talked about hoarding and you know, a lot of violence. But what do you think? The best in
The,
people, or what?
the very first part of the question, can you repeat it again? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
absolutely. Do you think that these disasters and some of these catastrophic happenings brings out the best in people, or what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it can showcase the best and the worst in people. So we see some of the worst in people. We see the way that, and it's not that people are bad. I think that everybody responds to stress in different ways, right? So I think that it brings out the biggest challenges, sometimes the worst, but I think it also really showcases the goodness in people. I really do. I do think that people inherently want to do good, want to help people, want to alleviate suffering. And that's part of I thought long and hard about the appeal of writing a story like The Line Between, a disaster story. And I've always been drawn to disaster stories, disaster movies. And, I really thought long and hard about that one day. What is the appeal of this? Why do I like this? Why am I drawn to this? And I think it's because our everyday world is so noisy. We're surrounded by noise. We have so much access to news and opinions, and just, more than ever, totally different than 4 decades ago, 3 decades ago. And when you have a disaster, when you have some pending terrible thing, it quiets all that noise and everything becomes very central. There's only one goal, and that is the survival of you and the ones you love. And so everything becomes very focused and the rest goes away. And I think that's why I like that. And then your heroes shine through. And I look for those moments. I love to hear about those moments. And those are the moments that I don't like the news. But when there's something like the miners that are trapped, or the boys trapped in a tunnel in Thailand, you see heroic people rising to the occasion. And I think that gives everybody hope.
Yeah, I agree. We're talking to you from Buffalo, New York, which is the city of good neighbors, and
Mm.
we take that very seriously here.
We just had a little debate about this very topic before we talked to you, and I really hugely believe that it comes down to love, and in any kind of tragic situation, and in your second book, we band together in love and survival. But I just feel like love is like the meaning and the joy of life, and
Absolutely.
that comes out in a lot of your writing. And thank you for that. Thank you.
Oh, of course.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Thank you for your time.
Well,
We've enjoyed having you.
it's been a pleasure having Tosca Lee with us today. And I know you're all going to want to connect with her, and you can follow Tosca on her website, toscalee.com. She's also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. Or follow her on Goodreads and BookBub, or better yet, pick up one of her amazing books anywhere books are sold. And of course, Kristen and I highly recommend these 2 latest books in the series. And Tosca, we cannot wait to read this new book that you have coming out. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's so good to meet you in person too, face to face.
An absolute pleasure.
Wonderful. Take care now.
Thank you.
What a great discussion with some amazing topics, Kristen.
My goodness, we really covered so many different things. You know, obviously, we both have an interest in environmental things. We always talk about these issues. Somehow it gets back to that. And that was one of the things that really struck me in these books because, for example, there was a theme running through here of these seeds that were being stored away in the event of a global catastrophe and in case we needed to regenerate and regrow our food source. I thought that was fascinating. But another theme, of course, is one relating to climate change. And here we had the permafrost was thawing, and these dormant viruses were able to suddenly make the leap through, in this situation, a deer carcass that people then ate in a village. And actually, this actually happened in 2016. Some permafrost that was thawing in Siberia, a carcass was consumed by hunters, and people in the village became sickened. I think very tragically, a young boy died. And these are some of the warning signs that we need to be paying attention to when we talk about what are the effects of climate change.
And I do think that that was one of the little pieces of history that Tosca had gotten this story from, was that permafrost. And you know, it just shocked me how timely this was with COVID and what we're going through right now. And I think we're all sort of tired of talking about COVID a little bit, but then again, we want to know, you know, how did it get here? How do we get rid of it? And above all, how do we prevent it from happening again? Being better stewards possibly, but also being super educated on how it got here and why. And it just really blew my mind in Tosca's book, because as I was reading it, she was talking about things like quarantine, masks, gloves, limited supplies in grocery stores. The hospitals are full, and shortage of vaccines. Everything that we're going through right now. And I just, I'm just hoping that this is the end of it, that we're coming to an end, and that there's nothing new on the horizon.
Yes. In fact, I always am encouraging people to press in deeper, because when you see how all of these things are interconnected, it is mind-blowing. You know, for example, there is a connection, and we're still figuring this out, but there is a connection between the emergence of new viruses and a loss of biodiversity. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, a loss of biodiversity, how does that even relate? Well, you know, you got to think about it. If you have a population of animals that is now very limited to just a few animals, we don't want that, because a disease can run rampant, a new virus can emerge. You know, for example, elephants and these megafauna creatures, their metabolisms are very slow. So a virus doesn't have time to mutate super quick like it does with maybe a rabbit or a rat. And I'm certainly not a scientist or an expert, but these are the things that I think non-scientists need to start pressing into and understanding about biodiversity loss and why we need to be concerned about climate change.
And just to have the, to understand that we do have some say. We do have a voice, even if it's just one voice in this world. There's one other quote from Tosca's book that I really loved, and she said, "There's always a choice, but not if you want to do the right thing." And that stuck with me for a good while, and I thought, that is interesting. When we reach a decision of what to do and not to do, or what to be held accountable and not to be held accountable, and we just decide, well, we don't really have the choice. We have to do the right thing. There were so many great lines from this book that I am going to be taking with me long into the future. So, Kristen, what's on your radar? What are you thinking about or working on?
Well, actually, a couple things. One of the things that we touched on here, we didn't discuss it much, was this idea of altruism. And I've really been wrestling with this idea of, are there people who simply act for the good of others for no other reason other than to act for the good of others? And for example, in her book, there was a very mysterious character named Noah, and he basically sacrificed much in the way of his finances, his time, possibly his life, to shelter others. And I was thinking about this character, and especially in light of what we are going through on a national and international level today, why did he do this? You know, what do you think? Do you think people act just for the good of others, or is there always a self-interest involved?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think it goes back a little to what we were talking with about Tosca. I think that a selflessness in volunteerism, or maybe any career where you're dedicating your life to a cause, really comes out of love. And there's a lot of different kinds of love, but I think the best one is the selfless kind, where for a time being, of course, we are selfish creatures. We have needs that we need to fulfill: shelter, food, support, emotional. But at some point in our lives, for a brief period, to truly love or care about someone else, we have to forget about ourselves. You know, I have a friend, an older couple. They've been married for, I think, 65 years. And I asked them, what is the secret to your marriage? And the gentleman said to me, it's the bus effect. And I said, what does that mean, the bus effect? He said, if a speeding bus is coming down the street aimed at my wife and I will push her out of the way and fall in front of it to save her. It is this selfless love that I think causes people to do heroic things.
Wow, that's very well put. In light of that, and I know that you are somebody who likes to volunteer and you are very giving of yourself, what's on your radar?
What's on my radar? Well, here's what my radar is. My takeaway, I cannot get this out of my mind either from the book, is this notion, and I've heard it before, but we need to be reminded, just to enjoy every single day. And you may have a bad day, and you may get bad news, but there is something good in every single day if we're open to seeing it. It's like the glass half full, half empty theory. Yes, I can find something to complain about. Can I find something to be grateful for? And maybe this is the joy in life too. What's happening right here now? Because you said so when you were speaking with Tosca, that you looked back on your college years and where did they go? And they were such wonderful years. Yeah. I feel the same way about my college years. They were just a gem, and they go so swiftly.
Yeah, and I think you and I are in similar shoes where we have young adults that are moving out of the house or have moved out of the house in your case. And I just treasure those times where we're all under one roof. And I've really learned to be in that moment and really just soaking it all up.
It's precious, precious times. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And now I just want to give a shout out to our incredibly talented sound engineer, the Mr. Mark Carey. We're leaving you with a few storm predictions to pique your interest, or maybe you want to read ahead. We're going to be interviewing Christina Baker Klein and her life-changing book, The Exiles, Christina McMorris and her incredible book, Sold on a Monday, Laura Morelli and her beautiful book, The Stolen Lady. And in the meantime, stay on the radar with Kristen and me by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com, our Facebook page and Twitter. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our amazing authors, you can view the video portion of this podcast on YouTube.